past week could be viewed as maybe one of the worst weeks in the history of the National Football League. And while you can't necessarily blame them for how their players act per se, the league themselves does share in the blame for this being such a bad week because of their action and, more importantly, their inaction on these matters of abuse. The way they've handled it, the way they've tried to sweep it under the rug, the way they've been reactive instead of proactive. The NFL in large way has made its own bed and now has to lie in it. And just when it seemed like last week things couldn't get any worse, then bam! Here's one of the biggest stars in the league, one of the most clean-cut stars in the league, if you will, Adrian Peterson of the Minnesota Vikings, getting arrested on allegations of abuse against his 4-year-old son. And to me, it's troubling, it's deeply concerning, and it has nothing to do with the impact on the Minnesota Vikings, your stupid fantasy football league, even the National Football League as a whole. Because to me, this really, gets to the heart of the matter and gets to the core of some flawed thinking that I see in our society still today. And I get the touchiness of the subject when it comes to how parents discipline their kids and how a lot of parents take exception to somebody trying to tell them how to teach their kids right from wrong. I get it, it's a slippery slope of trying to sit there and make sure people don't go too far as opposed to not wanting to be a nanny state and meddling too much in people's individual affairs. And let's be honest, how kids ultimately turn out by and large starts at home. Now, you could have the greatest parents in the world that did a tremendous job, and a kid could turn out completely like shit. And sometimes that happens. And sometimes on the flip side, you could have terrible parents, and the kid turns out brilliantly. And sometimes that happens too. But by and large, the best way to ensure that a kid has the best chance at success in their life starts at home with a loving, nurturing, caring, structured environment. There is no question about it. And there's also no question in my mind that children need direction. Children need discipline. They need to know that certain actions can carry certain consequences. And if you don't want to deal with or accept those consequences, maybe it's best to learn how to do the right things as opposed to the wrong things. And in a lot of ways, I firmly always believe that children want direction and discipline. They might curse you out for it. They might act like they hate you for it. But ultimately, kids need it and kids want it. They want parents to be parents. They want parents to provide direction. They want parents to teach them right from wrong. They want parents to give them direction and to hold them accountable and to make them better people as they grow into adulthood. But just because something has been done a certain way for a long time, or just because your parents did things a certain way and you feel like you turned out fine, that doesn't always necessarily mean that it's the right thing to continue to do those same things. For example, bloodletting was used as an accepted form of medicine for hundreds and hundreds of years to treat all types of ailments and illnesses and sicknesses and injuries. Just because it was an accepted form of medicine didn't make it right. In a lot of cases, it just made people's ailments and illnesses and sicknesses worse and led to many people dying that probably didn't have to die because of the practice that was widely accepted to begin with. Look at slavery. That was the law of the land in this country for hundreds of years. Just because that's the way it was, it most certainly didn't make it right in that time, and it most certainly doesn't make it right today, and it doesn't make it right when we look back on those times either. Reality of the day, my ass. Slavery was fundamentally and morally wrong then, and it most certainly is now. Just because previous generations engaged in it and embraced it doesn't mean that it was an acceptable form of behavior for anybody else to engage in further on down the road. The same thing applies with segregation. Just because Jim Crow laws in the South were the law of the land for many decades, that doesn't mean they were right. Just because that's the way it was doesn't mean that it was acceptable, doesn't mean that it was morally correct, doesn't mean it was the right thing to do. You even look at people that grew up in the Depression era and sit there and talk about how it made them who they were. They appreciated everything, and it sat there and taught them the value of what little they had, and that things were more important than just material things. Okay, but you still worked your ass off to make sure that you hopefully provided a better life for your kids than your parents provided for you. Just because that's how it was doesn't mean that was the best. Just because that's how it was doesn't make it right. And when it comes to the whole subject of using discipline such as a switch or whooping a child, just because your parents did it, just because people have used it in the past, just because you might have received it and you felt like it worked for you, that doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do, and it frankly doesn't even necessarily mean that it works at all. And I know, again, so many people are going to be so quick to defend whooping and, using a belt or a switch because that taught me lessons and that taught me discipline and all of this other hot garbage. And I'm sorry, that's exactly what it is, hot garbage. How much do you want to bet that if you go into our U.S. prison systems and you ask a lot of these prisoners, they'll probably tell you that they got whooped with switches and belts and got hit with fists and spanked repeatedly as kids? Did that stop them from becoming a part of the prison system and becoming convicted felons? Apparently not. Look at all of these people that engage in domestic violence. How much do you want to bet that a lot of these individuals were also whooped and spanked and disciplined in some type of physical manner as a child? It's the whole thing of sometimes violence begets violence. And you might sit there and think that, hey, this is really going to teach them a lesson. But again, all it maybe is doing is teaching somebody that the only way to get by is through violent means. And this is how you have to keep it going. It's a cycle that perpetuates itself from one generation to the next. How much do you want to bet that the majority of people that engage in child abuse were actually abused as children themselves, physically, mentally, emotionally, sexually, any combination or all of the above? This whole concept that whooping works and it's guaranteed. And that's what my parents got. That's what my grandparents got. My great-grandparents got. Okay, well, let's ask your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents if whooping works so damn well for them. Then why is our country in the damn shape that it's in to begin with? All of these people over all of these years were getting their asses whooped all the time. And look at all the fucking problems we have. Look at all the idiots from these previous generations that have committed all these horrendous and heinous crimes. And you're going to tell me that whooping works? Oh, Jiminy Christmas, get the hell out of here. And then we get to the whole heart of the matter when it comes to Adrian Peterson and what he is accused of. And mind you, it's still important to say accused of. He still has the right of innocent until proven guilty and being afforded the constitutional right of going through his due process. With that being said, though, the bigger fundamental question here is, you're talking about alleged use to which he purportedly has admitted to using a switch on a 4-year-old. A 4-year-old. Does a 4-year-old really need to be hit with a switch or a belt? A 4-year-old. Somebody from a cognitive standpoint, somebody from a mental standpoint, somebody from an emotional standpoint is, oh, guess what? 4 fucking years old. Does a 4-year-old really need that? And frankly, to the parents out there that use belts and switches on a 4-year-old, I have this flat out frank ass question for you. What does it say about your parenting if you have to use a belt or a switch on a 4-year-old? Especially in the case of an Adrian Peterson. Here's a man built out of granite, 225, 230 pounds of pure muscle. And he feels the only way that he can get his message across to provide direction and discipline and consequences and accountability to his 4-year-old son is to repeatedly whoop him with a switch? What is wrong with people? What does it say about you if you think the only way that you could get one up on a 4-year-old is having to use a switch, a belt, a paddle, or some other type of damn object? And then later on in life, where do you go from there? If you've already started using a belt or a switch or a paddle or a whip or some other type of crap when they're 4 years old, what do you do when they're 12 or 14 or they're 16 and they start busting out and they start showing their ass to you? You certainly can't use the same disciplinary tactics that you used when they were 4 years old because, hey, frankly, if you used them when they were 4 years old and they're still cutting out and showing their ass when they're 14 and 16, ding dong, dumb dicks, maybe the discipline back then when they were 4 didn't work to begin with. And by this time, if you've used it for so many years, they've become immune to it. They think it's funny. They don't even think it's a punishment anymore. Where do you go from there? What are you going to start doing? Pistol whipping the fucking kids, hitting them over the heads with steel chairs? I mean, at some point in time, when is enough enough? And especially in the case of Adrian Peterson and what he's partially admitted to, reportedly, and what has been talked about. Is switching or whooping or beating a kid to the point of bruising and scarring really helpful? What are you teaching that child? A 4-year-old, a defenseless 4-year-old who is looking to their adults, to their parents, to their elders to provide them with direction and discipline and leadership and accountability, to teach them right from wrong. What the hell are you teaching these kids by whipping them to the point where they bleed, they're getting hit on their damn scrotums, they got stars all over their freaking legs? What can you be possibly teaching these kids that is going to benefit them long term? What the hell type of positive lesson is a 4-year-old going to learn from getting his ass whooped like this other than, oh my God, I'm scared to ever do any fucking thing because if I do, I'm going to get my ass whooped. You know, fear can be a powerful motivator. I grant you that. But at some point in time, fear can become incredibly counterproductive. And in situations like this, again, I emphasize using a switch on a 4-year-old, somebody who just 1 to 1.5 years before that was just finally able to start using the pawpaw and stop having to have their ass wiped by somebody else. Now we're sitting there and graduating to hitting them with a tree branch or a fucking belt and thinking that this is effective discipline and direction and leadership and accountability for little children? And of all people, Adrian Peterson, a man who, correct me if I'm wrong, just last year lost a 2-year-old son at the hands of another man via child abuse. You would think of all people, he would understand the great gift that he's been given by being able to have a son with him, a 4-year-old son. You would think he would understand and appreciate what could happen if you go too far. You would think with having lost a 2-year-old son to abuse that, hey, maybe just because the way this was fucking done by my parents and other generations before, maybe there's a better way to go about it. Bottom line is here to me, Adrian Peterson is flat out in the wrong. Now, does that necessarily mean that he's guilty of child abuse per se? Does that mean that he deserves to serve time in jail or prison? Does that mean that Adrian Peterson doesn't love his son? No, I don't think that's the case at all. I'm sure that he loves his son a tremendous deal, and perhaps even more so after understanding the hurt and pain that could be caused by losing a son, even if it happened to be a 2-year-old son that he had just recently found out about and had frankly never even met. He should understand what it's like to have a great gift like that taken away from him. I'm sure he appreciates being able to have a son in his life, being able to see his son. It's something that so many people don't have the ability to have for one reason or another. And I'm sure he loves his son tremendously, and I'm sure he wants the best for his son. And he works his ass off in part to help provide for his son. And he wants his son to have every possible advantage and benefit he can possibly have, and God bless him for it. And I'm sure he thinks that he's in the right by holding his son accountable and trying to teach him right from wrong and making sure that he understands that when you do the wrong things, there are consequences to those actions all throughout your life. I don't criticize him for that. I appreciate that. But just because you're doing that or trying to do that or your heart is in the right place, that doesn't make you right. What Adrian Peterson did, ladies and gentlemen, was flat out wrong. To me, it looks like a case of a loving father going too far and crossing over to a point of being counterproductive and being flat out abusive. Does that necessarily make Adrian Peterson a child abuser? No. Does it represent a bigger problem in society where we are sitting there and when it comes to how we discipline youth, we're saying just because that's how it was done, that makes it right, even though just because it was done that way doesn't make it right, and just because it has been done that way doesn't mean it needs to be done that way in the future. That's the bigger problem here. It's so many people sitting there and saying, well, I worked out just fine and that's what happened to me. Well, great. You know, I never really got spanked or whooped by my parents. I feel like I turned out somewhat okay. It worked for me. Great. You know, I wish more people were raised that way. Maybe some kids need to be spanked. Maybe some kids, as they get older, occasionally when things get really serious, maybe they need to get hit with the belt on the butt or a switch every once in a while. I'm not saying that that's 100% the wrong thing to do 100% of the time. But again, I can't envision myself as a 4-year-old getting a whole lot of good out of getting whooped with a belt or in this case a switch to the point where I get hit in the nuts and get damaged there, which could potentially scar me for life, mind you, and I get all types of cuts and bruises all over my leg. How is that teaching me a lesson? How is that doing anything productive at all? I look at how I turned out and the way my parents raised me, and I thank them, and I'm appreciative for it every day, because God knows if I had to come up a different way and I've been treated in a different manner, similar to how Adrian Peterson was treating his 4-year-old son here, and frankly how so many others treat their young kids, who knows what the hell would have happened with me. Maybe I'd have stayed even more on the straight and narrow, or maybe I would have rebelled so much and learned not to fear anything that I would have went on a completely divergent path, and maybe it ended up in prison or 6 feet under the fucking ground. Again, people, it is time to get realistic about this shit. It is time to understand that just because things were done a certain way in the past, that doesn't mean it's okay to do them. It doesn't mean that they're the right thing to do. And it doesn't mean that it's the best thing to do in the future. Because if that was the case, we'd still have slavery. We'd still have segregation. We'd still have people doing bloodletting, trying to cure themselves of fevers and the common cold and all other types of dumb shit. I do believe, again, that kids need direction, that kids need discipline. They want direction and they want discipline. But is switching a 4-year-old kid, teaching them to respect their parents, or is that teaching them to fear their parents? To me, kids should respect and admire and look up to their parents, not fear them. A kid fearing his parents, what are you teaching them? Later on in life, you're supposed to want your kids to come up to you and be honest with you and tell you anything and everything. Well, if they're always fearful when they are being honest that they're giving you exactly what you want, and then you're going to whoop their ass for it, or God knows when you did it when they were 4 years old, only knows what you're going to do to them when they're 16. What, drag them behind the fucking car? At some point in time, this madness needs to stop. Again, I'm not saying parents shouldn't occasionally spank their kids, because sometimes the little shits need it. But again, a kid who only a year or so ago before was potty trained and stopped shitting in his own drawers and now is probably finally able to wipe his own ass, does he really need to be whooped with a switch to the point of bruising and bleeding and scarring by a grown-ass man? I mean, that's troubling and that's concerning. And what's really been concerning is the number of people that have tried to defend this. This is a shame. You want to sit there and occasionally use a belt or a switch on a 14 or 16-year-old, that's your business, that's one thing. But understand this, there's a gray area, there's a fine line between disciplining and crossing over into that next area. And in this case here, that's what I think happened with Adrian Peterson. His heart was in the right place, but his head wasn't. And he didn't stop himself, and he went over the line, and he went too far. And it's a shame. I feel bad, not so much for him, but obviously the 4-year-old. And it troubles me tremendously to see how many people have tried to come to his defense on this. A 4-year-old kid. You're defending whipping a 4-year-old kid. The fuck is wrong with our society, man?